The Wild West was brutal. People died from gunshots, snake bites, and sicknesses that had no name. But not every death made it into the dime novels. Some were too strange, too terrifying, too unexplained. This wasn't a land of peaceful goodbyes. It was a place where travelers vanished without a trace, where entire cabins were found with everyone inside, dead but untouched, where bodies turned up in places they never should have reached, and sometimes no one ever found the body at all. Most stories from the frontier focus on heroes and shootouts, but if you listen closely, behind the cowboy tales and bar fights, you'll hear whispers about people who went mad in the desert, about graves that wouldn't stay closed, about things seen at night that didn't walk like men. At Beyond the Wild West, we're not just interested in how people lived. We want to know how they died, the messy, forgotten, and sometimes downright creepy ways the frontier claimed its own. So if you think you've heard it all about the Old West, think again. These are the 10 creepiest frontier deaths no one talks about. And trust us, some of them will stay with you long after the video ends. Top 1. The man who dug his own grave, then waited. He said he heard death calling, so he got ready. In 1866, just outside of Fort Griffin, Texas, a man named Thomas Lyle appeared in town. Nobody knew where he came from, but he was quiet, polite, and deeply, deeply unsettled. Within days of arriving, he began telling people that something was coming. For him. Not someone. Something. He wasn't drunk, he wasn't sick. But every morning, he walked out to a patch of dry earth behind the trading post and started digging. At first, people laughed. Just another loon out west, they said. But day after day, he kept digging, shovel by shovel, deeper and deeper. And when asked why, he calmly answered, "It asked me to. I don't want it angry." A week later, he finished, 6 feet down. He lined the bottom with blankets, set a Bible near the edge, and then he waited. Sat by the hole, staring into it for hours at a time. On the 7th night, townsfolk heard a terrible scream. By morning, Thomas was gone. No signs of a struggle, no blood, just his boots, neatly placed at the edge of the grave, and drag marks in the dirt leading down. No one ever saw him again. They filled the grave in. Then someone noticed the Bible was gone too. Top 2. The axe murderer who vanished into thin air one night. One family, 0 suspects. Just blood, wood, and silence. In 1890, the frontier town of Cimarron, New Mexico, awoke to a scene that would haunt it for decades. A small family of 5, father, mother, and 3 children, was found brutally murdered in their cabin. Every skull split clean down the middle with what appeared to be the blunt edge of an axe. No signs of forced entry, no signs of struggle. The bodies were still tucked into bed. The killer had moved through the house with precision, like a ghost with a grudge. At first, locals blamed outlaws, then spirits. But suspicion soon fell on a quiet drifter named Ellis Boone, who'd been staying at a nearby inn. Witnesses claimed he'd bought an axe a few days before and left it behind, washed and spotless, the morning after the killings. Boone vanished that same morning. No one ever saw him again. The sheriff followed boot prints to the edge of a riverbank, where they stopped. No boat, no tracks, nothing but swirling water and the faint scent of smoke from the cabin's dying fire. Years later, hunters claimed to spot a man in the mountains with strange eyes and a long gray beard, muttering about keeping the silence. But Boone was never found. No trial, no justice, just a bloody cabin and 5 unmarked graves. And sometimes, folks say if you pass through Cimarron in winter, you can still hear the creak of a cabin door when no one is near it. Top 3. The coffin that screamed back. He was buried at sundown, But something inside wasn't ready to stay dead. In a remote Wyoming settlement in the 1870s, a man named Elias Carter was pronounced dead after a violent fever. No doctor confirmed it, only the town's undertaker, who'd seen enough death to trust his instincts. Carter's body was pale, still, unresponsive. That was enough. The ground was hard that winter, so they hastily buried him in a shallow grave behind the church. No autopsy, no embalming. Just a pine box, a few prayers, and frozen silence. But that night, strange sounds echoed from the burial ground. Soft at first, like thuds muffled by earth, then clearer, louder, panicked knocking. Someone reported hearing screaming. The townspeople dismissed it as coyotes or wind echoing through the valley, until two boys snuck out the next morning and found dirt disturbed atop Carter's grave. When the townsfolk finally exhumed the coffin, out of morbid curiosity or guilt, they were met with horror. The inside of the coffin lid was clawed, bloodied. Elias's fingernails were gone, his face contorted in pure terror. He hadn't been dead when they buried him. Not yet. The town never held another service without a doctor present again, and for years after, people swore they heard faint scratching from the cemetery, especially on cold nights. Maybe it was the wind, or maybe Elias Carter still wasn't ready to rest. Some say that in the Old West, the dead were buried fast, but sometimes not fast enough. Top 4. Buried alive in a mine collapse. Trapped in total darkness, they knew they wouldn't make it out, so they left their last words carved in wood. In 1886, outside a silver mining town in Nevada, a group of 8 men descended into the depths of the Iron Widow mine, one of the richest and most dangerous shafts in the region. Locals said the rock creaked like a dying animal. But silver was silver. They went in anyway. Hours later, the earth shifted. Some said it was a minor quake. Others swore it was sabotage. But when the dust settled, the entrance to the mine had collapsed, entombing the crew alive, hundreds of feet underground. Rescue efforts began immediately, but the tools were primitive, and the rock too thick. It took 4 days to reach the first chamber, and by then, it was too late. They found the bodies of 6 men slumped against the wall. 2 were still clutching picks, as if they'd kept digging until the very end. But the most chilling discovery was on the support beam in the main tunnel. Messages carved into the wood by knife. "Tell Anna I tried. We ran out of oil. It's getting cold. Forgive me." And one final line. "We hear something. If it's not you, don't dig." To this day, no one knows what that last message meant. Panic? Madness? Or something else down there in the dark? The Iron Widow mine was sealed permanently that same year. But some say, when the wind shifts just right, you can still hear tapping from beneath the hills. Top 5. The spider bite that killed a whole camp. It started with a fever. It ended with a burial pit. In 1879, at a gold prospecting camp deep in the Montana wilderness, a miner named Eli Thorne stumbled back from the riverbank, complaining of a sharp sting on his leg. By nightfall, he had a fever. By morning, his skin had blackened around the wound. By the end of the week, he was dead. At first, no one thought much of it. The frontier was full of things that killed you slowly. Bad water, spoiled meat, angry snakes. But then 2 more men died, both complaining of similar symptoms: swelling, confusion, skin turning dark and brittle like burnt leather. A trapper passing through camp claimed it was a bite from the widow of the timber, a black spider with a red streak that locals said carried a death curse. Others blamed bad hygiene or cursed gold, but whatever the cause, the sickness spread fast. The camp doctor, a former barber with 0 medical training, tried bleeding the infected. One man was boiled in a barrel of salt water. Nothing worked. By the time help arrived from the next town over 20 men were dead. Their bodies were burned in a shallow trench near the river, and the camp was abandoned within days. Some say it was just a venomous spider bite that turned into gangrene and infection. Others whisper about a cursed claim, or something that came out of the ground with the gold. Either way, one thing's for sure. In the Old West, even the smallest bite could kill you. And sometimes, take everyone with you. Top 6. Hung for a crime he didn't commit, then proven innocent years later. The rope snapped his neck. The truth came too late. In 1882, in the dusty town of Dry Creek, a young ranch hand named Thomas Ellery was dragged from jail at dawn, accused of murdering the local blacksmith and setting fire to his shop. The town had no sheriff, only tempers and torches. A trial was held, if you could call it that. 3 hours. No lawyer. No defense. Just a mob demanding justice. Witnesses said they saw Thomas near the shop the night it burned. He had a cut on his hand. He'd once quarreled with the blacksmith over a saddle. That was enough. He was hung from the old elm tree by the saloon, his boots kicking in the morning dust. His last words? "I didn't kill him." For decades, the story faded, until 1910, when a retired drifter on his deathbed confessed to the crime in a Colorado hospital. He'd killed the blacksmith in a drunken rage, then lit the shop to cover his tracks. He named details no one else knew. The brand of whiskey stolen, the coin purse left behind. By then, Thomas had been dead nearly 30 years. The elm tree was long gone, and a new post office stood where his shadow had once hung. The town put up a small plaque. Quiet. Easy to miss. But here's the truth the plaque doesn't say. The West didn't always wait for the law. Sometimes it skipped the trial and buried the truth with the body. Top 7. Death by lightning inside a church. The safest place became a death trap, and only one walked out alive. It was a Sunday evening in 1876 in the small frontier town of Red Hollow, Nebraska Territory. A sudden thunderstorm rolled in, blackening the skies faster than anyone expected. Inside the town's wooden chapel, over 40 people had gathered. Farmers, children, ranch hands, and their families, for a night of hymns and prayer. Then, just as the preacher opened his mouth for the benediction, the storm struck. A bolt of lightning tore through the steeple, exploded the iron bell, and slammed straight down the center aisle of the church. The wooden floor splintered and caught fire, pews cracked and overturned, and flames erupted from the pulpit. Witnesses, those outside, said they heard a sound like a cannon blast, followed by silence, then screaming. When the smoke cleared, 39 people were dead. Some from the blast, some from the fire, some trampled in the panic. The church was reduced to blackened beams and ash by morning. But one person survived, a 13-year-old girl named Annie Carver, who had left her seat minutes before the strike to fetch water for her sick mother. She returned to find the door blown open, the walls scorched, and her entire congregation gone. She never spoke in public again. Locals called it a sign. Some said divine wrath. Others whispered of a curse. But one thing was certain. In the Old West, even the house of God couldn't promise safety. Not when the sky itself turned against you. Top 8 bitten. Then buried alive, on purpose. He thought the snakebite would kill him fast. The grave was slower. In the dry hills near Silver Butte, Arizona Territory, 1882, a land dispute turned into one of the most chilling revenge tales the frontier would ever whisper about. The victim? A ranch hand named Thomas Grady, known for gambling, drinking, and crossing the wrong men. According to local accounts, Grady cheated a group of miners out of several gold claims using forged papers and slick talk. By the time they discovered the fraud, Grady was already spending the profits in the nearest saloon. But the miners didn't go to the sheriff. They planned something slower. Late one night, Grady was ambushed on his way home. Witnesses later said he'd been seen staggering near the riverbank, pale and drenched in sweat. When search parties went out, they found nothing. Until 3 days later, a dog led them to a shallow grave. What they uncovered chilled the blood. Grady was buried, yes, but not dead when he went in. The coffin lid bore scratch marks, deep and desperate. Inside, clutched in his frozen hand, was the severed head of a rattlesnake, still rotting. Rumors spread quickly. The miners had tied him down, forced a live snake to bite him, then nailed the box shut while he was still breathing. The snake bite didn't kill him instantly. That was the point. No one was ever arrested. The miners had already moved on, and in classic frontier fashion, the law looked the other way. But folks in Silver Butte swore they could hear scratching in their dreams for weeks after. Because in the Old West, some graves weren't meant to be quiet. Top 9. The Headless Rider Who Returned. They buried him without his head. That didn't stop him from coming back. In the rugged hills near Dead Man's Hollow, Montana Territory, 1875, travelers began reporting something strange. A lone rider, cloaked in shadow, galloping silently across the ridgelines on moonlit nights. No voice, no face, no head. The story behind the legend starts with a bounty hunter named Cole Hargrove, infamous for bringing in outlaws dead, more often than alive. Ruthless and fast on the draw, he was feared by bandits and despised by locals. One night, after collecting a bounty on a young cattle rustler, Hargrove was ambushed on his way out of town. They found his horse wandering the next morning, soaked in blood, saddle torn, rider missing. 3 days later, a prospector stumbled on Hargrove's body in a dry creek bed. His boots, his badge, his pistol, all still there, but his head was gone. Locals assumed outlaws had taken revenge, but why leave everything else behind? And where was the head? Then came the sightings. A black horse on the ridgeline, a rider in a duster coat, no face beneath the hat. Dogs howled, horses bucked. Some said if you looked too long, the rider would turn, and you'd hear a whisper like wind through a noose. Justice. People stopped traveling after dark. A few brave souls tried to track the ghost. None succeeded. One man fired a rifle at the figure, only to find his horse dead the next morning, throat slashed as if by a blade made of shadow. To this day, old ranchers swear, on a full moon, if you hear hooves where there should be none, don't look up, because some riders don't stay buried. Top 10. The Man Who Pickled Himself to Death. They found him 30 years later, preserved like a ghost with skin. In a forgotten mining town near the salt flats of Utah, an old legend lingers of a man who vanished, only to be found decades later, perfectly preserved in a shallow pit of salt. The story goes like this. He was a recluse. No family, no friends, just a shovel, a cabin, and a deep suspicion of strangers. When winter hit hard and food grew scarce, he retreated deeper into the earth, into one of the old salt mine shafts that riddled the hills. People assumed he left town or froze to death in the wilderness. Nobody went looking. Why would they? 30 years passed. Then, during a new mining operation in the 1920s, workers stumbled upon something horrifying. A figure, curled into a corner of the shaft, skin intact, eyes half open, and body eerily lifelike. It hadn't rotted. It hadn't decayed. It had cured. Like meat. The surrounding salt had drawn out all moisture, leaving him pickled, a human jerky sealed by time. No name, no record, just a notebook with cryptic scribbles about preserving the soul and becoming one with the salt. Some say he did it on purpose, a strange attempt at immortality. Others say he simply died alone, and the earth preserved what people had forgotten. To this day, locals call him the Salt Man. And in a museum not far from where he was found, a single boot and a tin cup, crusted with salt, sit behind glass. Because in the Old West, death didn't always mean disappearing. Sometimes, it meant staying forever. We remember the Old West for its gunslingers, gold rushes, and dusty trails. But behind the legends were stories far darker and far stranger. Stories that didn't make it into the history books or the Hollywood scripts. These weren't just deaths. They were whispers in ghost towns, blood on the saloon floor, bones buried under collapsing mines. Some were accidents, others vengeance, and a few still completely unexplained. But each one reminds us that the frontier wasn't just dangerous, it was unforgiving. A place where a lightning strike in a church could erase a town's future, or where one man's paranoia turned into a perfectly preserved corpse in a salt mine. At Beyond the Wild West, we don't just chase myths. We dig up what time tried to bury. The grit, the horror, the forgotten truths. So if this episode gave you chills, hit subscribe, ring that bell, and stick around. Because we've got more untold tales coming. From buried secrets to unsolved crimes. The Old West was far weirder than you think. See you in the next one. If the ghosts don't get you first. Cowboy dead.